this was really interesting for me reading your Divine Timemaker.
Hmm.
You talked about different views of God and time, but that both camps, right and left, however you want to split them up, they both say that God is in some sense responsible for creating time. I like that, but can you go over the two different options you give for us?
Well, so the claim is not that they created time, but that they are responsible for the existence of time.
Responsible. Sorry.
Yeah, because there's lots of things. So, like, like Paul Gould and like some of those other things in these debates about abstract objects, and they're
Right.
like, God's responsible for these in some sense. Does he create them? Are they just in his mind? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, right. Same thing with time. Like, everybody wants to say God's responsible for the existence and nature of time in some sense. What does that look like? What does that mean?
Mhm.
And so I'm like, well, okay, there's at least two views that I've seen throughout history, throughout the Western world, and also in Hinduism, which is this one claim is God creates time. So I call that the creationist option. And then the other view is that time is in some sense identified with God. Maybe it's just identical to God himself, or it's an attribute of God, like one of his essential attributes.
Yeah.
And so then I call that the identification view. So those are the two main views that I look at in the Time Maker papers. This creationist option says God's a time maker, and the identification view, which says God's not a time maker, but he's more like a watchmaker because he creates like some different features of time that are not really essential to time, but they're essential to they're like properties of a timeline or something like that.
Yeah. Man, that's really interesting. I was just wondering, just as you said that, I wonder. So some people like PVI or Yandel would say that like the eternal the forms exist alongside of God, and he's like not really responsible for making them. I wonder,
Mhm.
are there any philosophical theologians or any like Orthodox Christians that would say that time exists alongside of God, and yet he's not responsible for its existence?
I don't know any who would say that. In the Hindu tradition, this debate really does come up, though, where where there's these early Jainists and Hindus who are saying time is this eternal, uncreated substance,
Mm.
and since it's uncreated, like by definition, it's not the sort of thing God could create.
Right. Right.
And then some people in the Middle Ages, like Raghunatha Shiramani, he's like, but I kind of want God to be like responsible for all the stuff.
Yeah.
So what do I do? And he's like, I can, here we go. Ontological parsimony, get rid of all these other things. I only need one eternal uncreated substance that can do all this stuff. God can perform all the same roles that time would perform. And it actually makes more sense. So just identify God with time. And so it's not this separate thing existing alongside it. Instead, God just is time itself.
Is that a type of identification view then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's very explicit. He's like, yeah, time is just is God.
Literally identifying. Okay.
Yeah, and he does the same thing with space, and he does the same thing with the ether. And I'm like,
But this is off topic, man. I'm sorry,
yeah.
but is that I question that because did he remove like the personality of God in identifying time with God?
No. So what you would be doing is you'd be like, right, okay, so time is this uncreated eternal substance that's got, it's responsible for doing certain things. And then you're like, well, God does all that, so God's time. Well, God's responsible for a whole bunch of other stuff too. So time just has maybe it's just an attribute of God, or just it's got a whole bunch of other properties you didn't expect.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as you can tell, no one is putting time as some abstract in Plato's world out there.
I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody who's done that. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody has. I've seen people accuse temporalists of doing this all the time.
Okay.
Like Hugh McCann does this. Like he accuses people, and I'm like, it's certainly not Swinburne's view. It's certainly not like Dean Zimmerman's view, or this is so and so. It's certainly not Craig's view.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there might be somebody out there. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's always for whatever crazy position, there's always somebody who holds it. So in order to get into the creationist option and the identification option review, we got to talk about time a little bit.
Yeah.
So what is time, and can you go over those various options you've given?
Yeah. So what I do in the paper is I point out that creationists typically hold to something called the relational theory, and then identification view typically holds to what's called the absolute theory. So quick snapshot of each view. The relational theory, they tend to kind of like either ignore what time is. So like we'll do like a St. Augustine does, which is they'll ask the question, what is time? And then just ignore it and move on. And I'm like, oh, that's annoying. Can you say a little bit more?
Yeah.
Or some later, like there's this assumption though that's built in there that is time exists if and only if change exists. So if no change exists, no time exists. So you need something that changes in order to generate time. And then when it kind of gets developed later on, the relational view will say time is just merely a relationship between events or between moments. So time exists if and only if change exists, and time is just merely a relationship between events or moments. Absolute theory says, nah, that's crazy. That's nonsense. No, time is like this. Maybe it's like this uncreated eternal substance, or it's a natured entity that makes change possible. It's this thing that makes change possible, and it's responsible for different things, like being the source of moments of time. It's responsible for like giving unity to a series of temporal moments or a timeline. It might be responsible for making things exist at the present. It's going to be responsible for the direction of time. It's going to be responsible for the way we talk about past, present, and future, what's earlier than later than. So time's going to be this thing that actually plays all these roles.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so can you introduce the listeners? I've talked about time in a time travel episode with Taylor Sear.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested, go back and listen to that. But just real quick, can you lay out like presentism, growing block, eternalism, moving spotlight? Moving spotlight is what I like, but maybe you can disabuse me of that one as well.
Sure. So these are views on what's called the ontology of time. And so the ontology of time is asking the question, what moments of time exist? And so a moment of time is like it's like a way things are, but could be subsequently otherwise. And so a presentist says, well, what moments of time exist? Just one, the present. That's it. Past moments no longer exist. Future moments do not yet exist. The growing block's like, let's have a few more. So you've got that present moment, that's totally cool. But those past moments, let's keep those. Let's keep those. And so time's like growing and growing and growing and growing. The future doesn't exist, but the past never ceases to exist. So you've just got past and present existing. That's it. Eternalism, in some sense, says all moments of time exist. They're all equally existent. Don't really want to talk in terms of past, present, and future because they don't want to say there's such a thing as an objective present, but they do want to say whatever moments of time exist for a timeline, they all equally exist. So the year 2020 exists, 1983 exists, 2025 exists. All those moments just exist. Now, the moving spotlight, the traditional moving spotlight, what it does is it takes that eternal block of time, but it's like, I do want an objective present. Where do I do that? I can't figure it out. Okay, well, what if like I've taken this eternal block and I add something else to it? I add this sort of like a spotlight that like just kind of points out that's the present moment. And as something else becomes a new moment becomes present, the spotlight moves to like point out that's the present, and then it moves again to point out that's the present and that's the present. So you get this eternal block with this extra structure, which is the spotlight that somehow picks out the objective present. That all encountered like a bunch of like really weird problems, so it became very unpopular. But Ross Cameron comes. Well, I don't know if you can say comes to the rescue, because he's like, actually that old view is kind of garbage. So let me give you a new one. So he's like, I'll give you a new moving spotlight. And so the new moving spotlight, what it does is, in one sense, he talks about it as like it's an enriched presentism. So you've got the present moment is the only one that's real or actual, but there's other stuff that exists too. And so there's all this like non-present stuff that exists.
He brought a bunch of non-present stuff into the present, kind of.
That's what it looks like. But I've been really struggling to work through this, because it seems like those past moments actually still are there, but though they change their character when they cease to be present, it seems what's going on. Whereas that's not really the case on the original moving spotlight. So as like things go through this episode, the original moving spotlight would say, well, all those temporal parts at the earlier moments, like towards the beginning of the episode, they're still thinking they exist at the present. They're just mistaken. And so that's like one like problem for the moving spotlight. You can never know you exist at the present. Whereas the new one, though, like all the stuff that like that's no longer present, it's not conscious. And in fact, it's not actually even physical anymore. So all that stuff like there, it ceases to be physical, it ceases to have mass, it ceases to have consciousness, it ceases to have all these sort of things. So it solves some different problems, but it's really weird. And so I'm still trying to figure out exactly what's going on here. So there's some pieces missing for me in how to tell the story.
Okay. That new one sounded crazy until you just explained it that way. And I think of like, I like it. I don't know how to do anything with it, but it's like a YouTube video where like the little red dot that's playing, and the past it's different. They're not like us, whoever's watching on YouTube right now. Dr. Mullins and I, in the introduction, we're not still thinking that we're going right now, even though that moment is real and you can go back to it. You can move the spotlight of the cursor. Maybe that, I don't know. We'll see.
Something like that.
Yeah. But
give me a couple of years, I'll tell you.
Definitely. You got to come back on and help us with that.